Well, we don't normally bring guests up on the stage, but make the exception today. Is he awake? Oh, he's not? He's sleeping? Okay, well, that's all right. We still want to show him off. Well, I figured Grandma would bring her up here. Or might try. Does Grandma sound right? Wow, that's got to get used to that. Oh, thank you. So obviously he cannot demonstrate the fact that he can say Grandpa this early. He's asleep. Well, the thing that's good is that you can't disprove it. I can't prove it, but you can't disprove it. But anyway, this is Liam, and I figured I'd at least put him to sleep during the sermon, but he's already gone. He's out. But he is a doll baby, and we're proud of Shelby and Scott and this little one. So happy that he's here. So just pray for him, and we appreciate your support and your love. Thank you, sweetie, for bringing him up. Yeah. I want to call your attention real quick to one other thing. If you don't know, hopefully you're aware by now that we're using. First of all, I'm using the wrong glasses. I wanted to see Liam up close, so I kept those on, and I'm going to need to switch them now so I can see you. We are very seriously exploring the possibility of merging with another church, and so we've been in contact with that church, and we're galvanizing, as Gary would put it, Pastor Gary would put it, getting this together and getting it going. First of all, let me just say up front, it won't be easy. Not going to be easy. Nothing that is going to be good is going to be easy. So understand that. But I do want to point out on your calendar for March are all the dates when we're going to start meeting with their congregation as we lead up to what we're calling a soft launch on Easter Sunday at 9 o'clock here in this worship center. But notice there that we'd like to try to get, now this is not just the leadership teams. This is the whole bunch of us. So we're going to try to do that 2 times. Once on the 14th at 3:30. We'll meet right here. And then another time on the 28th. And this will give us a chance to hear from each other, hopefully get to know each other a little bit. That's going to take time, especially with the coronavirus thing and the mask and the distancing and so forth. But that's okay. In some ways it's good that it's a slower process. I think that can be healthy. And then also notice that we're going to at least attempt to begin working with those that are members of their worship team. We're going to begin that on the 17th, and we'll talk a little bit, and then we'll start to play and put some things together, and hopefully we can have something ready for Easter Sunday, and so that'll be fun as well. So, and I've sent Gary all these dates, and he can communicate those to his folks. I just wanted to mention one more time, when they were meeting before, they met like at 1 or 1:30 in the afternoon. So they're even less used to meeting at 9 o'clock than we are. So we're gonna get after them, though, aren't we, Gary? We're gonna get them, but it's just gonna take a little time. So we're gonna be patient with each other and allow this to kind of move in a patient, kind of slow kind of way, because we don't want to get ahead of the Lord, and the Lord's got all the timing figured out. He's got it all mapped out for us. We just need to trust Him. So just wanted to call your attention to that. It's in your bulletins, so you can take it home, and it can remind you of when you can come. And if you can't make both of those meetings, you don't have to make both of them, but we'd love for you to. But at least try to make one. And we want to get some things rolling here for Easter. So kind of in light of that possibility, and I think it's a very strong possibility, tremendous potential I think you'll see that as things begin to come together. I came up with this message, Ready, Set, Grow. And I think that's kind of where we are. And so we're going to kind of go through the steps here and the reasons why we need to kind of get in this mode. So we're going to look at Romans chapter 1, 14 through 17. We'll look at that in just a moment. But I want to ask you a question. Have you ever wondered what we're supposed to be doing until Jesus returns? Have you ever wondered that, ever asked that question? There was 3 prophetic preachers who were conversing one day, and they had a big table, and they were laying out their maps and their timelines, and they were looking at the signs of the times, and suddenly Jesus returned. And one of the prophets said to Jesus, "Hey, you're early." The other 2 said, "Hey, you're late." You see, we have to be real careful that we don't get too caught up in focusing so much on that we forget the mission we have until He does actually come. I can tell you for sure that one of the things we're not supposed to be doing is predicting. Now, I don't have any issues with, being prophetic, and there's obviously many, many prophecies in the Bible. There's signs of the times. We're to be watching. We're to be aware. We're certainly not to ignore it. We want to keep a nice balance because really we have some other things to do in the meantime until He does come. And believe me, we'll all know it when He shows up. We don't need to worry about that. And so we need to kind of not be so worried about trying to predict as much as maybe focusing on some other things. By the way, I don't know if you remember Yogi Berra, the great theologian Yogi Berra. He was a great baseball player too. But he said that prediction is really difficult, especially when it pertains to the future. So there you go. There you go. So what should we be doing? Well, let's find out, because guess what? The Bible tells us. Lets us know. So in verse 14, it says, "I am obligated both to the Greeks and non-Greeks, both to the wise and the foolish." So this is Paul obviously talking to the Romans, who were non-Greeks, by the way. And so there's a couple things that we want to pick up from this verse to kind of get us rolling. First, a God-given vision must involve sharing the gospel with anyone. Okay, I'm going to use the word everyone, but I think anyone is even better. Paul was always very careful to include not just everyone, but anyone. I mean, if there's a difference. The Jews, the Greeks, the genders, slave, free, and then he adds for safe measure. This is the first time that I remember him using, maybe he used it somewhere else, but the non-Greeks. That's all, folks. And that's all the folks. So one of the first conversions, I don't know if you knew this or not, but one of the first conversions in the New Testament was an Ethiopian. So we need to remember how important it is that we include everyone and anyone. So the vision then is not based on a feeling that we have to muster up. It's not about how we feel. It's really more about something that's more elevated, I think, certainly in Paul's mind. Notice that Paul says, "I am obligated." I am obligated. He says nothing about feeling or emotion. He says, I have an obligation. In other words, in Paul's view, sharing the gospel was mandatory. I mean, it was organic. It was just naturally part of what we're doing. It must be what we're doing while we're waiting for the return of Christ. So how do we do that? There's always a how. So we see this here in verse 15. The first thing is we need to get ready. This is why I'm so eager to preach the gospel also to you who are in Rome. Now, Paul, he was always ready. He was always ready. But notice the word he uses. He uses the word eager. Eager. We must be eager. Now, as I said, these Romans were non-Greeks. So Paul was eager. Paul was always pushing the envelope. He went from the Jews to the Greeks, and Gentiles and the non-Greeks, and so on and so forth. Day of Pentecost, as you remember, it just spread the gospel to everyone in the world, practically, at least all of the language groups that existed at that time. So Paul was just an eager kind of guy. Now, what does eager mean? Eager means something that we really want to do. And it also means something that we're really good at. What do you think we're really good at? We're good at being impatient. We already got that down. That's what it means to be eager. It means to be impatient. This is the one thing you can be impatient about, and that is to share the gospel. I mean, we're impatient about everything else. Might as well be impatient about sharing the gospel. You know, the thing that interests me sometimes as I kind of study people and myself and just kind of look at the world and so forth. You ever noticed how quickly bad news spreads? Boy, I mean, zip. You know, it's there. Not so much good news. Not so much good news. We need to flip that. We have good news, so we need to be eager to share it. And then also we must be precise. We need to share something specific. Paul was eager to do what? Just talk about whatever? No. But to preach the gospel. He wasn't even eager to preach about the church or how to be successful or how to deal with stress. I'm not saying those things aren't important, but that's not what he's eager about here. He was very specific. It was the good news. That's what he wanted to spread. And he was very, very specific about who? The non-Greeks in this particular instance. So he's kind of moved through all the people groups, at least that he was aware of. And of course today there's many more than that. We don't want to leave any of those out. That's the thing Paul was trying to get across. Now, I don't think he had to deal with maybe Hispanics and Latin Americans, things like that. I don't know. But we would include those. You know, we talked about last week, we need to throw in some brown along with the red and yellow, black and white and all that stuff in that song. And so it's very important we understand that, sharing the love of Christ with everyone. I was on Zoom with some friends this past week, and one of them is a preacher that I went to school with. We both went to Oklahoma Baptist University. And he's been on the mission field and been a missionary for many years and pastor and everything. And he had learned from someone in, I think it was Libya, a friend of his who was a missionary, and he was telling him that hundreds of Iranians are becoming believers in Iran. And it's actually causing some unrest, you know, in that country, in that Muslim country. Can you imagine us sharing the good news of, you know, in a way, I think maybe we have caused that to some degree in America, to the point where we're getting backlash now, aren't we? Trying to eliminate Jesus and the gospel and God. But I think we could do a little bit better sharing the good news. And I think now that we're getting a little bit of opposition, maybe we'll stand up a little bit taller. But we need to be sharing. We need to be sharing. God's not any respecter of persons. He's not a respecter of countries or governments when it comes to the gospel. He includes all of them, and we're to share the gospel with all of them, the good news of Jesus Christ. So that's the get ready. Get set is this. It says, "For I am not ashamed of the gospel, because it is the power of God that brings salvation to everyone who believes, first to the Jew and then to the Gentile." So after the sermon last week, we went to eat with the Childs, and Jordan was sharing with me that when he was listening to the sermon, so I know at least one person was listening. It's not bad out of 40 or 30 or whatever we have. But anyway, he said, here's the scripture that came to my mind. And this was it. You know, the 16th verse, "For I'm not ashamed." So Jordan kind of inspired this message. So we'll give him credit. If it's a really good message, you can give me credit. If it's a really bad message, you can give him credit. Yeah. But I think it's a good message, not because of me, but it's just a good message because it's in the Bible. So, but he's the one that kind of planted that seed, and I appreciated that a lot when I was studying this past week. So how do we kind of take apart this verse and see what it means to get set? Well, it means we must be unashamed. Unashamed. Yeah, have you ever wondered what causes shame? Well, think about it. Well, being afraid of what other people think, right? That can cause shame. We got to get over that. We really do. We have to get over that. I think we made it pretty clear last week that people already think we're crazy. Many of them. If you're worried about that, you can stop worrying about it. They already think it, so get over it. It's just, the fear of rejection. That could cause us issues. Already noted, we know that there's going to be rejection out there. The world will not recognize Jesus. The world does not recognize Jesus. You see, there's really nothing for us to be ashamed about. We're not being asked to save those people. We're being asked to share with those people. And then the rest of it is, I can't save anybody. So what's wrong with me just sharing my experience and the good news, and then let that seed be planted and let the Spirit take it from there? Well, the other part of this scripture that I think is really important, and I'm sure Jordan picked up on this, and that is that the gospel itself is the power of God that brings salvation to everyone who believes. See, we don't bring that power. We just share it. And the gospel has that power inherently inside of it. So it's not in our power to bring results anyway. Gospel itself is the power of God. So we share and we let that work. We let Him work. I think sometimes our biggest hindrance is not just being ashamed, but I think we tend to be a little biased. We have some prejudice. Sometimes we're not conscious of that. We look at some people and for some reason we can walk right up to them and maybe share it with them or talk with them about it. And other people we tend to be hesitant about for whatever reason. I think the thing we've just got to do is we've just got to stop worrying about the who and start caring about the what. What is it we're going to share? We cannot be ashamed of the gospel. So we have ready, we have set, then we have grow. Now, I think that's going to happen. As we merge together with this new church, the U Church, and we see that begin to unfold over the next year, we are going to see some growth. But we don't want to just depend upon that. It's a good start. Sometimes it's poor. I wish more churches would do that. I think it makes churches stronger, and it probably gives more feelers out there. It sends more feelers out there in terms of sharing the gospel. So the grow part is in verse 17. For in the gospel the righteousness of God is revealed, a righteousness that is by faith from first to last, just as it is written, the righteous will live by faith. So when we're talking about growing, we're talking about really revealing our faith. Growing has a lot more to do with just numbers. has to do with our own maturity, our own faith growing, and not necessarily in size, but just in action. That's what this is about. Paul's saying this is an action that we do. We share the gospel however and whenever we can. Now, this may surprise you, but sometimes opposition and opportunity go hand in hand. And I talked a little bit earlier about opposition. That we're probably getting more than we've ever gotten, and there's laws being talked about and all kinds of things in the legislature that could affect us and could be in opposition to us. And maybe that's what it'll take. Maybe we need a little persecution. We'll stand up and face this. Have you ever thought about this? It doesn't take faith to kind of go where you're accepted and go where you're appreciated. It really doesn't. But it does take faith to go where maybe it's not so easy. And the thing we need to understand is that over the last century or two, and really before that, we have literally invaded the territory of the adversary. Why are we surprised that there's been sort of a falling away in America? Why are we surprised that we're up against this opposition? I mean, we have made some pretty good inroads over the centuries and certainly the years into Satan's territory. Now, we've made a few missteps and we've stepped in a few potholes and stepped on a few landmines in some instances, and the adversary is taking advantage of that, and we obviously want to see more seats filled than we have. But the point is that this is a battle. We've been in a battle. This is a spiritual battle. This is not some game. So this is another reason not to be ashamed and not to feel guilty and not to beat yourself up. I get it. Churches have been slam dunked over the last several years, and some things have kind of caught up with us, and now we're having to make some changes and we're having to do some things different. Ultimately, that could really be a good thing. So we need to understand that we're not on the defensive here. We're on the offensive. When the Bible talks about the gate, nothing will prevail against the gates of hell. The gates of hell will not prevail against it. That's an offensive. That's what we're doing. We are storming the gates of hell. And we've been doing that for many, many, many years. And right now, we've got the adversary exactly where he wants us at the moment. But it doesn't have to stay there. We don't have to stay where we are. Ready, set, grow. We can still do that. We can still do that. It just really goes back to the basics. We've kind of overthunk this thing, Have you ever overthunk something? Yeah. I know, you're a teacher. That's not a word, right? Yeah. Overthink. We overthink it. When really it's pretty simple. I'm not ever going to say it's easy, but it's pretty simple. So we need to go where we're rejected. We need to go where there's opposition. Well, we're kind of in the middle of that. So let's stand up and let's stand up to it, and let's do some things that says in a very definitive way, we're going to share the gospel. We're going to find a way to penetrate our community and share the gospel. If we have to come up with some new, innovative ways to do that, we're going to do that. So we take the gospel. Now, what's the gospel? I just give it to you very simply. It's the birth, the life, the death, and the resurrection of Jesus Christ. That's the gospel. Now, I know there's a few more things you can add, to embellish those things, but that's the basic gospel. And this is what reveals our faith, because it also reveals the righteousness of God. Now, this is something we've talked about a couple of weeks, because none of us would say we're righteous, and we shouldn't, because we're really not. So who is the righteousness of God? Well, we know that is Christ. So He is the one that was and still is rejected. Nobody wants to hear about Jesus. You know, they'll edit that out of, I've noticed a couple of times they haven't done that on some of the news programs. But most of the time they'll edit that out, or they'll just say you can't say Jesus. You can sometimes get away with saying God, but you start talking about Jesus, that's a different thing. But here's the deal. Jesus is the center of the gospel. We can't leave Him out. You know, we can't just say, well, fine, we'll just talk about God. Because Jesus is the righteousness of God. This is why we can't be ashamed. Can't be ashamed of Jesus, because He's the focal point. And you know, the interesting thing to me is most people don't reject God or a higher power, quote. I mean, you talk to most anybody and they'll usually say, well, yeah, I believe in God. But just bring up Jesus. Find out how quick that conversation ends. So it's not easy, but it's simple, and we need to let the gospel do its work. One of the reasons why that happens is because they just come under conviction. So we need to place Jesus in His rightful spot. God incarnate, the Son of God, the way, the truth, and the life. Through Him. Right? It's through Him. So in that case, we have no other option than to do this, operate by faith. That's all we can do. We cannot control how somebody else responds. We can't control whether they say yes or whether they reject Christ. We can't control that. It's not our job. Can't do it. But we do need to take the action of sharing the gospel and our faith. I mean, from the very beginning until now, faith has always been that which we should live by. Right? Well, apply that to sharing the gospel. If you do it in the right way, it's not going to be nearly as big a deal to you. You're not going to be really afraid of rejection. You're going to be afraid of what's going to happen, or ashamed, or anything like that. Because you're doing this by faith that you're going to share, God's going to take it from there. And I think that helps us to do that. We have difficulty living by faith, all of us. We really tend to live by sight. And it's understandable. Sometimes we get in predicaments and it's difficult. I recall the story of the man who was walking along a cliff and slipped and fell and would have fallen to his death, except he got a hold of a branch. And he was holding onto this branch for dear life, and he kind of was hanging there, and he was stuck, and he didn't really know what to do. And finally, after a while, he decided just to yell for help. Help! Is anybody up there? And he really didn't hear much, and he kept asking, is anybody up there? And help, and so forth. Finally, he hears this voice from God. At least he seemed like it was from God. And the voice said, let go of the limb. And so the man said, what? Let go of the limb and I will save you. And the man replied, is there anybody else up there? And that's us, We just kind of hold on to whatever we can, and we just don't want to let go. We don't want to hold on to our security. We want to hold on to, we don't want to be afraid. We don't want to be in situations where we feel uncomfortable. And if we're going to grow, ready, set, grow, we got to get past that. Got to be able to share. Well, let me just conclude by looking at Romans 10, 12 through 15. This is a great passage. It says, "For there is no difference between the Jew and the Gentile." Here we have Paul talking about it again. There must have been some problems back in the day of bias and prejudice. So don't think that this is a new thing today. It was happening then, and it's happening now, and it's something that we need to address and change. "The same Lord is the Lord of all, and richly blesses all who call on Him. For everyone who calls on the name of the Lord shall be saved. How then can they call on the one they have not believed in? And how can they believe in the one of whom they have not heard?" So here we begin to see the seriousness of and the importance of us sharing. How can they hear without someone preaching to them? And don't think about the professional preaching. That's not what it's talking about here. It's more of a proclaiming, which is something we all can do. And how can we preach or proclaim unless they are sent? So that's the grow part. You know, we can merge together and have a great time and enjoy, and nothing wrong with that. But if the ultimate result is not our ability to find where we fit in this whole process of sharing the gospel, then it's going to stunt the growth. And I love verse 15. It says, "And how can anyone preach unless they are sent? As it is written, how beautiful are the feet of those who bring good news." Sometimes I'll get a paper when I go to the Hy-Vee to get my coffee or whatever I get. And when I'm at the register, we're always talking about, I said, "Can I have my receipt? Because if this is bad news, I'm bringing it back." And they said, "Well, we don't want any bad news here either, so you can't bring it back, sorry." But, you know, we kind of mess around with that. And so we, you know, even the cashier who's selling me the newspaper asks me sometimes, "Is there any good news in there?" People want to hear good news. They're tired of hearing bad news. Too much bad news. Need some good news. Believing comes by hearing. Who needs to hear? Anyone who will. Everyone who will listen. Paul reminds us of that over and over and over again. This is why, if you want to go back to the prophetic side here just for a moment, this is why Matthew says, when all have heard the gospel, then the end will come. You want Jesus to hurry up? Get out there and share the gospel. And then once people hear, then they can call on the Lord. And what does the Scripture say? Everyone who calls on the Lord will be what? Saved. Well, so how will they hear? Hearing comes by proclaiming. Okay, they got to hear it. Somebody's got to share it. It's very clear that we are the ones that are being sent. This is why we can't be ashamed. This is why we've got to go and do it. So let's just look at these three words again real quick. Ready means to get eager to share the gospel. Set means to unashamedly tap into the power of God. Grow means to, by faith, share the gospel and let God take care of the results. In short, when we are God's mouth, when we are God's hands, when we are God's feet, we are beautiful to Him. That's what Paul is saying. The focus here is not on our so-called failure. See, we don't need to feel guilty about what's happened in the past. We're human, we're imperfect, God knows this, He's not surprised by anything that's happened. We need to get off of the past. Forget about the failure. He doesn't focus on that. He focuses on our effort. That's what makes us beautiful to Him, is our effort to get ready, to get set, to grow. Let's pray.